solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
the Constitution of the United States.
I'm curious. I think a lot of people have this whole, like, once I cross the 10-year threshold, I have to stay in. And I had that opinion for sure. You did at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a more evolved opinion of that now that you've
Yes.
spent time thinking about it? Yeah, what is that?
I mean, to a certain extent, I do feel like once you get up like past 15, 16, 17, like you really have to do some strong evaluation as to whether it makes sense to leave if you want to leave. But yeah, I think at the 10-year mark or even less than that, it's all about individual decisions, right? If the military isn't right for you and if you're not right for it, then why put yourself through 10 more years? 10 years is a significant amount of time. If you get to live to be 80, that's an eighth of your time. So wait. Please cut that if my math isn't right. But like, I don't think it is. But yeah, it's a big amount of time. And so if you're wasting it doing something you don't love, or it's not serving your purpose and you're not serving it well because you're not enjoying yourself, why put yourself through that?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it was always sad, especially in cyber. I would see a lot of folks that I worked with who were like clearly miserable, but were like, oh, I've got 7 years left, so I'll gut it out. And I was like, man, that's crazy to like. It sounds crazy when you really break it down, not emotionally, but at the same time, you're like, I get it. I get where they're coming from because I was there at one point in my life, and I think that it's definitely weird that we have that gut it out for that long of a time mentality.
And I also feel like people don't realize that most military members will not retire. It's a pretty small percentage that make it all the way to 20. And yet, at least for me, I felt there's like a pressure to make it all the way. That was my goal. Like coming out of RTC, I was like, oh, we'll do 20 years and I'll retire in my mid 40s and I'll have another career. It'll be great. And then I feel like when you're in, at least in my community, and maybe it's different for others, I hope so, it was almost like looked down upon. It's because for NAVs, you have a minimum service commitment of 6 years after you get your wings. And for pilots, it's 10. So it's like right around the 6-year mark, a lot of NAVs were leaving the service. And pilots, I feel, are in a little bit different position because their minimum commitment is halfway to retirement. So I feel like for them, it's a harder decision because they've already put in all that time. So I definitely felt that there's an underlying mentality or attitude where if you do less than the 20, that you're somehow like a lesser service member, or like you didn't do what you should be doing, or you didn't contribute as much as you could have. And maybe that's just perceived, and maybe that was something that I put on myself. But when people would get out around me and I'd hear the conversations about that person after they left, it's, oh, so-and-so got out. Oh, wow, I can't believe they got out. And it's like this stigma about people choosing a different career. But then on the other side, that stigma makes no sense because they did what was best for them and they served their time. It's not like they're cutting out early and disappearing. They've done what they signed up to do. And there is no shame in saying, you know what? I reached my commitment. I did what I was supposed to do. And now I'm going to move on to something else. I feel like I cheated a little bit because I was already at the natural closing point, I feel. And then also when you go to school, it provides a different type of structure, right? So obviously I went to undergrad and that was its own little world. And then going to grad school, I'd been to school before, so I knew what to expect from a graduate program. I knew what to expect from being on site in school, going to classes. So I feel like, yes, I traded the military structure, but I replaced it with a school structure. And not saying that's like what everyone should do by any means, but it was, I think, perhaps less uncomfortable, perhaps because I had, okay, well, I'm going to school. There was like a next step that was defined. And it's in 2 years, I'll get this degree. And then I have to figure stuff out. But having said that, when I left and I was trying to look for a job, it was still very intimidating. And it's funny to look back at the list of positions I was looking at because they have nothing to do with there's no rhyme or reason to the jobs I was looking at. It was like YMCA coordinator, which of course I have no experience in doing. And then like a GS position that would be basically navigator work, but as a GS. And it was all over the place. And again, I stayed within my comfort zone and I found a job as a contractor that I felt would be an extension basically of my military service. It was very much like executive officer work, but I was wearing civilian clothes instead. and I was still working on a base. And I was like, that'll make it easier because I still have the community I'm familiar with surrounding me. It's work that I already know how to do, even though it's a slightly different mission and command. And I'm going to school, which has its own structure. So I guess at the time it didn't feel quite as like overwhelming. It certainly was in some aspects, but I do remember the day that I officially left. You're on terminal and then there's the actual day. And when you retire, there's a full ceremony to commemorate your service and people say nice things about you and you get to give flowers to your spouse or whatever. And you get to say your piece and have that closure. But when you separate, there's none of that. There's nothing at all. It was like a day that started and ended in like the normal way. And there was no recognition that, okay, now I am Sam and I'm not a captain and I'm not in the military and my terminal leave has completed and now I'm out on my own. And I think that for those of us who separate, that makes it even harder to make the transition because you don't have a clear bookend to your career. You had a starting bookend. You raised your hand to commission or you swore your oath of enlistment and that was your introduction. But then when you leave, there's nothing on the way out. It's just, okay, and today I'm not a captain anymore. Today I'm just a regular person. I was thinking about this the other day. People get so attached to their MOS or their AFSC, and they're like, oh, I have to continue in cybersecurity or I have to continue in logistics. But when you think about why you were put in that job, it really had nothing to do with you as an individual. Well, hey, Sam, we know that you love flying. Like, how'd you like to be a navigator? That wasn't the conversation, right? It was, what does the Air Force need? What does the Army need? What does the Marine Corps need? Okay, you met this minimum score, like the ASVAB, for example, on this test, and therefore you're put into this bucket of MOS or AFSC. There, at no point is there any consideration to, I wonder what Lieutenant so-and-so would like about this. So this need that we have to continue in a job that we didn't select, really, it was given to us, it doesn't make any sense. It's like you're given this opportunity to do what you want now. And a lot of us are like, oh, I know, I'll be an XO, but as a contractor. It's a great idea. No, like you don't have to do that. And I think it takes time for you to be like, I am not my duty title. I am not a navigator anymore. And I think for me, it was a bit easier because there's no such thing as a navigator out here in the real world. People use things like Alexa and Siri to get around. But so yeah, just decouple yourself from your job because you don't have to do it anymore. If you hated it, stop doing it. One of the women who also runs a podcast, Amanda Huffman, you may have heard of her. She's been very successful in her podcasts and her books. She was an engineer by trade and also an engineer in the Air Force. And she's like, you know what? I hate being an engineer. I really can't stand it. I'm going to pivot completely and start writing and producing podcasts. That's got nothing to do with her training or her education, but it's what she wanted to do. For vets, I would just say, don't feel so tied to your job because it was chosen for you. Now you get to choose. What mine looked like was just a series of trial and error. Like I said, I stayed within my comfort zone. I took a job that I knew I could do and I knew that I couldn't really fail at. I completely lowballed myself on the salary and had no idea how that worked. Plus then California taxes, it was like a double whammy. I looked at my first paycheck and I was like, oh, wow, that's not what I was expecting. So I think for me, it was just like, it was getting out of the comfort zone slowly, but surely. With each position that I took, it was like, okay, this is a little bit newer. I haven't done this before. And I think that many people follow that same discovery pattern. It's like they want to have the structure of the military, so they choose a position that's very similar to what they did or something that they're comfortable in. And then as they come to this recognition that they don't have to do that, or maybe there's another opportunity, or maybe frankly, they just don't like it and they want to branch out, then we slowly we crawl. Oh, I'll try this now and let's see how that works. We're still very timid about it. And that's fine. I don't think that you need to make these grandiose changes just because you've left the military. But I also think that is probably a product of not really planning for it and not really thinking a lot about it. I know for me, I put my papers in and then 6 months later I was done. It wasn't one of those, it wasn't like a years long process where I was like, okay, 2 years from now, I know that I'm going to be out and I should really start thinking about it. So I think if you're transitioning and you have a good lead time into it, a year or more, I think there's probably more opportunity for those folks to think about, okay, what is my comfort zone defined as? What positions would I be comfortable in? And then what are those positions that are maybe a stretch for me? And how can I gain the skills or the knowledge necessary where I feel more comfortable in this new environment, even if it is a slightly different job or skill set? So going back to your question of what should it look like? It should look like you doing some self-awareness and reflection 1 to 2 years before you leave and thinking about what would make you feel comfortable. What are some positions that maybe you'd like to explore and haven't because of your role in the military? What are some skills that you really enjoy, or what are some things you really enjoy doing? And how can that turn into a career? For me, I really like writing and I really like storytelling and I like music too, but that's an aside. I've never made it to the Mariah Carey status that I sought to be. But when I thought about what I enjoy doing and how I can spend my time and have it disappear instantly without me even knowing that the time has passed, it was really writing and storytelling. And so finally, after 4 or 5 positions and 2 companies and moving around, I was like, what would make sense? Communications would make sense. It's reading, it's writing, it's storytelling, it's all this stuff that I actually enjoy doing. And so it took 5 years for me to figure that out because I just wasn't deliberate in thinking about it before. I just, like you said, kind of went with the flow and I'll figure it out when I get there. That's a future Sam problem. That's not a current Sam problem. And that's the worst. That's the worst thing you can do. And that's why when you have friends and buddies who get out, don't drop them like a hotcake. Stay in touch, but if nothing else, to learn what they did and to learn some do's and don'ts. Obviously, be a good person and check in on them, but it's also really beneficial because here's someone who's been there, done that, who can help you and you can have discussions. And frankly, when I left, I was amazed at the people who stayed in touch and the people who didn't. People that I was very close to, who I thought would be there, it's like they were not. And then those who I never thought in a million years that they would keep up with me, they did. And it was very random about who did and did not. I think if you are a year or 2 out and you have friends and buddies who have left the service, check in on them because it'd be nice to hear from you, but then also check in to see how their journey has been and learn from them and see what has worked for them and what hasn't, and then use that to inform your own journey. Asking around within your circle in the military while you're all still active isn't going to be helpful either, because either they're going to look down on you for leaving early, or worse still, they're going to give you some bad advice because they also have not been in that situation. They don't know. So it doesn't help you to spin your wheels by asking your friends who are still active because they don't have that experience. And something else that I learned when I was getting out is jobs that I thought would be a good fit because of the skills I thought I had or the things that I wanted to do actually are a little bit more involved. And I'll give you an example. And that is when I was a project manager at Northrop, and that was my first gig at the company. And then I was like, you know what? I really miss leading people and being involved in people things. When I was a flight commander, that was what I enjoyed most, was helping the airmen and being there for them and doing all this stuff. I'm like, oh, obviously people leadership and getting involved with people equals human resources. That is the civilian equivalent to what I did as a flight commander. And I learned very quickly that's not accurate. That human resources is not just something you hop into because you're good at leadership or you like people. It's actually a whole profession, no way. And I would have known that if I had reached out to people ahead of time and been like, tell me about HR. What qualifications do you have? What did you need to do to gain the skills that you have? Because I learned that it's compensation, employee relations. There are processes involved in HR that I had no clue about. Writing an OPR and EPR performance review is not the same as helping with performance reviews on the civilian side. In fact, they're completely different in every way. So again, if you have an idea of the type of work that you like doing, it may be that the job you think equates to that is not quite what you think it is. And so those informational interviews with people in those roles are really going to be enlightening to you to learn what they really entail. If you call me and ask me what communications does on a day-to-day basis, I will tell you. And if you think it's this thing and I'm telling you it's not, now you know that, hey, maybe it's right for you, maybe it isn't. Or maybe this isn't the right company for you. Maybe there's another one that does more in line of what you're thinking about. But if you don't ask those questions and if you don't reach out, you're guessing. And you have to learn the hard way, which is, I think, what you and I both did and what many people do. But vets like to learn the hard way.
The next thing that I want to ask you about is family. As a woman who wanted to get out and have a family. What was it like for you contending with these desires? I feel, especially in the military, there's very much so like a career focused mindset.
Mm-hmm.
In America, it's also a career focused mindset. But then you want to emphasize a portion of your life that is very much so not your career. Those things can exist in tandem. You're doing it right now. But what was that like for you, having to work through de-emphasizing the military to emphasize this thing that I want to pursue?
Challenging, because I was not ready for motherhood in the slightest. And I think one of the contributing factors to me wanting to get out was I had seen mil-to-mil relationships can work. There's any number of examples. You probably have a couple of friends yourself that have made it work. In my community, there were several as well. But what I saw was, yes, the marriage may be working, and that's like a generous term, but there's always going to be conflict around whose career takes priority. Who do we follow around? Who's going to give up this so that the other person can do that? And if you don't get a joint spouse assignment, what are you going to do? Or how? And when there are kids involved, it becomes even more complicated in enacting the family care plan and all of that. And so that was like, okay, I don't want to do that. If I marry this guy and we are mill to mill, my career is going to have to lead the way, because there's only so many places that my aircraft is housed, right? It would be Hurlburt Field. And so he would basically be confined to Hurlburt Field and like trying to find different positions on base to fill and not progressing his career. And maybe it would work better if you were both in the same AFSC or the same MOS where you can progress at the same time. But when I looked at it, it was like, okay, there's already going to be a level of maybe resentment or sacrifice that's going to have to occur if the mill-to-mill relationship's going to work. And I think marriage is hard enough already without putting that on top of it. And I think being a military spouse, it definitely has its challenges. But when it comes to making that decision for the family, I think it's a no-brainer. I'm able to come with my husband wherever we go. There's no restriction aside from some overseas assignments. We will come with him everywhere. It's not like I have to say, oh, I can't because my aircraft is here. And so I think that helps the family dynamic. And then insofar as kids are concerned, yes, childcare is crazy expensive. And yes, it is still challenging to work and have kids in school or childcare, what have you. But because there's no risk of me being deployed and him being deployed at the same time, we will always have one of us around to assist and to parent and to be there for our kids. And so I think in that way, being a civilian has been really advantageous for us as a family, because we can spend that time with them that we would want. Right now, I'm very fortunate. I get to work from home, and we employ a nanny to help us during the day while I'm working. But I get to see my kids when they come home from school, and I get to see them at lunch. And if I was active duty still, that wouldn't happen. I'd be on a weird flying schedule where I might be flying at 3 a.m. or something. And then that doesn't even get into the challenges of the wait list for the CDC and some of the obstacles there. So I think being a civilian, being a military spouse, again, has its challenges, but in terms of raising a family and going that route, I wouldn't trade it. I think you have to look at yourself and do some digging and some reflection. I think for me, it's about who's going to care more if I drop dead tomorrow, my company or my family? I think the answer to that's pretty clear. And so I would hope it would be my family, well, depending on the day, But so from that perspective, family comes first. And so I feel what you're saying, though. It is very difficult because either you're a stay-at-home mom and therefore you do nothing, right? That's the perception. Or you're a working career woman and you don't take care of your kids. Like either way, there's judgment against women.
Yeah, exactly. Catch-22.
Yeah. And then you can't win either way. And so I think it's just, you have to be comfortable with yourself and the value that you're giving yourself. And you have to know like where those boundaries are. That's a good one, Billy. You got me. It's for me, I am a mother first. My kids come first. If there's something that they have going on at school, I make every effort to be there. And because the work will be there. The work will be there when I get back. I can, log on later in the evening and get it accomplished. But I can't go back and go to my kids' school event. I can't go back and chaperone the field trip because that's going to be over and that'll be done. But the PowerPoint presentation that needs to be completed, that'll be there waiting when I get back. That's not to say that I don't work hard, because I do, but it's a matter of finding the right balance for you. And that's going to look different for everybody.
How do you think you build up the self-awareness to self-diagnose?
Oh man, off the top rope again, Billy.
We're a hard-hitting podcast here.
No, these are great questions. And I don't know that you ever like truly figure it out. It's a work in progress. And you were talking about, how do you have the self-awareness to know that it's your ego talking? I don't know. I feel, you know how when you ask someone advice, but you ask advice because you really just want your own advice validated, or like your decision validated. I feel like you know that maybe it's your ego talking when you leave and you don't feel cool anymore. And perhaps the thing to do is just to like say it out loud. Okay, is that me talking, or is that my ego talking? Am I upset about this because there's genuinely something to be upset about? Or should I be proud of my spouse for doing what your wife did? Or, you know, for my husband who went to Ideating a lot last year. Okay, am I proud of him? Yes. So the problem is me then. The problem is my ego. It's not that I can't provide the support to him, or that I don't think what he's doing is worthwhile. The problem is truly that I am jealous of that opportunity, that I wish I could be there, but instead I'm stuck here doing XYZ. So I think having that realization of, and trying to separate out, okay, what about this is making me upset? Am I truly upset because I really wish I could go to Guam and Hawaii? Or I'm upset because she gets to go and I don't? If it's the latter, it's probably the ego talking.
Yeah, no, it very much so was in my case. I was just like, I just want a cool job. It was my initial conclusion. And then
you want to be cool.
Yeah, and then my follow-on conclusion was, why does my job being cool have anything to do with who I am as a person? Like, yeah. If my job is paying me well and gives me time to be with my family and do everything I want, isn't that what I want? Do I really want a job that's cool, but I work 90 hours a week? Is that really what I want? And I'm like, no, that's not what I want. And so I just had to go multiple layers deep, and that took time. And I just think that for a lot of veterans, I've had to do a ton of work to build up enough self-awareness to be able to diagnose myself. And I just don't think a lot of vets do that. And so it's cool for you to be able to talk about you being able to do it. And I really think that's amazing. And it's such great advice for people. So if you're out there listening, take notes. But
the best thing that you can do truly is write it down. And I know you're like, but you're a writer, so it's probably brilliant. It is. But even if you're not a writer, writing it down can really help to clear some things up in your mind. It doesn't have to be good. You're not turning it in for an assignment. No one is grading you on your writing. You don't have to show it to anybody. Just do it for your own benefit. And I know everyone's, I know the benefits of journaling. I have so much to unpack, or it takes too much time, or my handwriting sucks, or whatever. I get that. I made those excuses too. 100%. I was like, nah, there's too much here. I don't really want to start on that. But the thing is, if you don't start on it, you're never going to unravel it. You're never going to pull it apart. And the time is going to pass anyway. So why not just get started? And you don't put that pressure on yourself. Don't sit there with a blank 100-page notebook and go, okay, today's the day that we unpack years worth of things. No. There's a great book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It's a little hippie, I get it. But one of the things that she advocates for is to write morning pages, where it's basically like first thing in the morning or after kids dropped off, whatever, you just vomit 3 pages of whatever's going on in your head. And it can be anything from, I don't know why I'm writing this, to things to be grateful for, or just really anything that comes to mind. And I won't say that I do that every day, because I certainly do not. But on the days that I do, I will tell you that the clarity that comes from just getting all the garbage out is night and day difference between days I do and days I don't. And so please, if you're listening, just take out a piece of paper, spend 10 minutes writing. It doesn't have to be brilliant. You can shred it if you want. You can throw it in the trash. You can burn it for all I care. But just start the habit of writing things down. Writing through your feelings can really help show you what you're really thinking about, what you think you should be thinking about, and where your head is going and what you want to be doing. And it's also a lot harder to lie to yourself when you see your words written down. Oh, I love my job. Things are going great. And you read it and you're like, that's bullshit. Nope, that's not true. So it makes you dive deeper. And then also it has the added benefit of the fact that like you can go back and read where you were. There's been so many times where I'm like, man, my life was really messed up a few years ago. And I read back over my journals or the writings that I did. And I'm like, man, I've come a long way. And I think that's really helpful too, because you're seeing personal growth over the course of the years that you spend journaling. And then the last thing that I'll leave you with on this one is if you're writing down a memory a day, there's a great TEDx story on this, or a TEDx video on this. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, but he says homework for life. It's you write down one interesting thing that happened to you or one story that happened to you during the day. And at the end of a year, you can go back and put yourself back in these memories, relive them in vivid detail because you have them written down. And I think that's a great way, especially for vets, to like go back and be like, oh yeah, I remember when I was struggling with finding a job. And oh yeah, I remember when I interviewed for that. Or, oh yeah, I remember when my little baby was born or took their first steps or whatever. And it's a way for you to like time travel. And it's quite amazing. And if you're going to start writing and you're not sure where to start with this, start with what are my assumptions about what's going to happen after my transition? What do I assume will happen the day after? And seriously sit there and think about, okay, it's the day after my separation date. What happens? What do I assume will happen? And then think about what are your expectations for what will happen. Start thinking through those things and then try to build upon what expectations are put on you by others or entities, and what expectations do you have for yourself, and then work back from there to figure out how to get there.
Hey, everybody. I really hope that you liked this supercut of the Post-Military Podcast. If you did and you want to see more, I would recommend that you check out the whole episode, which is here on YouTube and also on multiple different podcasting platforms. If you like this and you want to support the channel, I would ask that you give the video a like, subscribe, and share the content with those who might need to hear it. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll see you in the next episode. Peace.